The Central Pacific Railroad was the western part of the first transcontinental railroad built across the United States from 1863 to 1869. After leaving the Truckee River at Wadsworth, Nevada, the route had to cross the infamous 40-mile desert Truckee route to get to Lovelock. This route was pioneered as a California Emigrant Trail in the 1840s. It was aptly called the Killer of Men. Historians estimate there is one grave for every mile along this near waterless expanse. Interstate 80 now goes along the route, which has not changed much. It is still mostly uninhabited, looking much the same as it did in 1844. Wadsworth on the Truckee River was the first place with good water, grass, and trees after crossing the 40-mile desert from the east. Upon seeing it, a pioneer woman said, "Now I know what heaven will look like." She just crossed what was commonly described as hell.
A winter view of the Truckee River at Wadsworth, going downstream to Pyramid Lake. The pioneers timed their arrival for when it was green and it was quite lush here. There were meadows all around and very good water for both the trail and the railroad.
Water from here had to be hauled out to all places east during construction and operation of the Central Pacific. There was a 40-mile dry gap between the Humboldt River and the Truckee River. Compared to the Truckee River, the Humboldt River is not much of a river, but historians call it one of the most important rivers in American history, as it made the westward migration possible across the Great Basin of Nevada and Utah. Wadsworth was a division headquarters of the Central Pacific Truckee Division, from Truckee, California to Winnemucca, Nevada, 204 miles. The focus of this video is what the pioneers called Promontory Turn, an area 5 miles east of Wadsworth. Going easterly from Wadsworth, Promontory Turn was the beginning of the 40-mile desert. Desert Station was 8 miles out. Then Hot Springs Station was 19 miles from Wadsworth. This was the place pioneers called Boiling Springs, the only drinkable water available on the 40-mile desert. Mirage was 26 miles out, near the summit of Hot Springs Grade. Hot Springs Grade was a reason for the abandonment of the original line in 1902. It was a 437-foot climb in 10 miles from White Plains Station, 34 miles from Wadsworth. White Plains was the end of the Helper District from Wadsworth. Extra engines had to be serviced and turned around here for many years. Brown, 46 miles from Wadsworth, became the connection point for the 1902 Harriman era reconstruction of the renamed Central Pacific Railroad through Fernley and Hazen across the other 40-mile desert route on the east side of the Hot Springs Mountains. This was longer than the original route, but it was faster and more economical as the grades were much flatter. The Civil War era Central Pacific had to be built by 10,000 Chinese using hand tools, horse wagons, and black powder. It was the major engineering achievement of the 19th century. For years, it was the only railroad connection across the United States, a thin line from the east. 30 years later, the dawn of the 20th century was a new era of excavation machines, such as steam shovels and tractors. So the new route, with gentler grades and less curvature, was built much more rapidly.
Here we are approaching Promontory Turn from the east looking west. The line across on the right below the mountains there is Interstate 80. Here the pioneers on the California Trail and later the Central Pacific Railroad had to turn around this towards that dark line you see right over the nose, which is the Truckee River. After crossing the 40-mile desert, they thought the trip was over, but they had 5 miles of deep sand to get through, as when they were most exhausted. Now we're over Fernley, coming from the west heading east. The line right to the right there is the current, the new railroad that replaced the Central Pacific, which we're going to see in a minute. It went to Hazen. The mountains right over the nose over there, those are the Hot Springs Mountains, and that's what divides the two 40-mile deserts. The Truckee route, which we are over now, and on the other side was the Carson route. Over the nose is, well, we're going to swing out a little bit here to get a better view to the right, and then we're going to be banking left to look down the 40-mile desert. Off in the distance is Hot Springs Summit, where the desert goes up and then drops back down into the rest of the 40-mile desert. Now we're coming around right over Promontory Turn. That water tank there is on the bluff. Interstate 80 appearing. You can see down in the lower right-hand corner, that is the Central Pacific grade. I'll put it there, right there. And that swung around and then crossed the current freeway and went up the hill a bit there towards that white area is Pleistocene ancient Lake Lahontan, the old shoreline. So it went up there and followed the contour and went back down. There's the California Trail next to the railroad. It's hard to see from the ground. Now we see the Central Pacific, that straight diagonal line going down, and it goes back down to the current freeway. The highway, the freeway, was built right over the old roadbed at this part, so it disappears for several miles. Coming up is Desert Station right there, and I saw on an 1890 map that there was a wagon road from here over to Fallon. You can see it from the air, but like many things that you can't see on the ground. I wanted to document this area because there's real estate signs up all over the place, and it's going to be gone pretty soon. Here we are where Promontory Turn is next to Interstate 80. Coming around, there's Promontory Turn, the little knoll you see there. From here, the about 6 miles to the river was deep sand, which just intensified the miseries of the pioneers. The railroad and the California Trail was on the other side of that, where that truck is. It went down. You can't see the Truckee River from here, but it's down there where that parting in the mountains is. Here we are on top of Promontory Point, 135 feet above the freeway. Looking down the 40-mile desert, the Central Pacific grade swings over in the other side, hazen in the distance. And then from here, the California Trail and the railroad swung around and started crossing the 6 miles of sandy waste to get down to the river. The pioneer wagons went 2 miles an hour. The train went 20 miles an hour. Now we go 80 miles an hour and complain about a boring, hard trip.